Welcome to the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. Today we are joined by Nish, Anil, and James Montemagno.
Whoa.
Hello.
Hello. We made it.
James,
I always like when the music fades out a little bit because I'm like, oh, it's happening. When we did Learn Live yesterday, it's like, boom.
Yep. So James has been on the show before, and we are all on the same team at Microsoft. We are on the .NET community team.
That's very true. Wow. This might be the first time we've had like 3 people from the team all on an ASP.NET Core stand-up.
It's a takeover. And what's really exciting to me is today we have Nish on. Nish is joining us from quite far away in India. So
absolutely. It's my pleasure too, John. It's really amazing to catch up with the team on a community stand-up. We've been watching the show for a very long time, and I know John and we've talked about I coming on the show for a very long time, but we glad that we were able to make it now.
Yep. Very exciting. Okay. Well, we have we're kind of constrained to 1 hour today. So yep. I'm going to start with some very quick community links.
And we're here like early too. We're kind of like, we're here early for everybody too.
Early. Yeah. And partly this, Nish could have made it work, but this is nice because it's still pretty late for you in India right now, right, Nish?
Yeah, it's 10:30 thanks to the daylight saving changes that happened recently. So the 1 hour shift. But I've been working with you all a little late, so it's totally fine with me. But and we have an exciting demo, so I will be awake for sure.
Very good. Okay, so here's all I have for the community links this week. I've got a quick one. Well, it's a great post. I love James Newton King's post. He writes, like really a lot of technical detail, and they're also pretty fun. So this is about what's new for gRPC and .NET 6. So client-side load balancing, really pretty cool. So this is and he's got a cool animation for this. So basically like detecting faults, and so discovering what the different gRPC server endpoints are, and then like registering them locally. But then if one goes down, detecting and failing over gracefully, and like being able to do that in just a few lines of code. So that's pretty amazing.
Nice.
And then also fault handling with retries. And when I was reading this, I was like, this feels a lot like HTTP Client Factory. And I wonder if they've got kind of support for policies. And sure enough, then he talks in there about policy support as well. So they're like the retry policy. Additional protobuf performance. So what was already there in .NET 5 was pretty quick, and they've continued to improve on that, including one of my favorite things is they've got SIMD support. So with SIMD support, it's like gets even crazy faster. So he talks about in there being able to do parallel processing with that. So pretty crazy stuff. And then also just some additional gRPC and HTTP3 support. So good stuff.
I still need to try a GR. I've done a gRPC demo a long time ago. I need to get back up on it. I think that's like my holiday experimentation is to play around with gRPC, I think.
I really like that about this time of year. It's like a bunch of stuff ships in November and things get kind of quiet in December and even part of January. And it's a great time to kind of play with all these things. And I really like reading through this. I was like, I kind of knew there was some new gRPC stuff, but I didn't know there was all of this. So
yeah,
quite a lot of stuff. Well, all I have that's left in the community links, and I can pretty much turn over to you folks, is we've got your post, James, on the whole .NET Conf 2021 recap. And that includes slides, videos, demos, and more. So links over, here's some of the top videos. And then the code is over on the .NET Conf GitHub page, including the podcast app. And when I was reading this post, I was like, well, we just got to do a show on it. And so here's the code. This is out in the repo. And with that, I'll just kind of yield my time to the crew here. So where do we want to start?
Sure. Yeah. I think on that blog post, and you shared the links too, we'll throw it into the chat. Yeah. Raja was asking on Facebook about I didn't know if Raja's question was about upgrading from .NET 5 to .NET 6, like what you need to know or what are your advantages that you get. So definitely check out like the YouTube videos, I would say, on that blog, because there's like tons of just .NET 6 improvements. I mean, besides performance, you're getting all of C# 10, which you can turn on most C# 10 features if you're using the newer, if you have .NET 6 installed, and in VS 2022. But then, of course, you're going to get tons of new features and tons of APIs and like tons of performance. And of course, .NET MAUI and new Blazor enhancements. I mean, my favorite thing from .NET Conf, like the keynote, one of my favorites, there's many favorite times, was like when Dan Roth showed the new WebAssembly like shrinker tools and how the WASM file like goes down to like 350 kilobytes or something like that, which is crazy, which is super cool. But yeah, Nish and I and team over at Plain Concepts, we work with Plain Concepts, amazing team over there. They build and collaborate with us on many demos. We needed a keynote demo, pretty much, Nish. I think that's what it was. Like, they're like, you're in charge of it. And I think we were like, okay, I don't know if because I podcast, and maybe that's why. But for these keynote demos, my opinion of it, and then Nish, I think you can give your opinion of it, is like, for keynote demos, I always felt like they were always way too complicated. Like, there was always new things thrown in just to be thrown in, or over architected that just uses tons of libraries. It's hard to follow the code. And when Nish and I came to kind of like own the demo of it, I said, I want this thing to be really simple. I want anyone to be up and running in minutes. And I want the code to look like if you were building it and following along with the documentation, like you didn't know all these crazy libraries and packages that were out in the ethos that maybe do a bunch of stuff, which is cool. But this should be like kind of like a raw like implementation, like base implementation. I don't know how you feel about it, Nish.
Yeah, that's true. I think James, when he first mentioned about this demo, I think his first requirement was it should be easy, simple. Like someone who just gets started with it should be able to follow along. I mean, usually with the demos, what happens is like, a lot of great engineers working on it. So there is a lot of patterns coming into picture, and then overall the complexity increases. But the challenge with that is maybe it's a great product, but in the end, someone who's getting started would find it really hard to understand and follow through. So I think from the day one, our goal was to make it simple. So every feature that we were trying to add was kind of like something which you go to, as James mentioned, you go to the docs, and if you copy a code and paste it in, and how you make it work, it should be the same way. So that's what we try to do. And in the end, I feel that it's really a great piece of demo that people can try it out themselves too.
Yeah, and it's like a lot of pieces too.
Quick plus one on what you're saying. I used to work on a lot of keynote demos for build and mix and different things, and it's like, I have the same philosophy. It's like, it's the whole thing of, what is it? The Mark Twain letter or whatever, I would have written a shorter letter if I had more time. Like, you really want to like condense and focus attention on one thing, like, or just a few things, and don't throw everything in. And I felt like that was always a challenge is, hey, we're shipping a ton of stuff. Let's show it all off, And so I appreciate that. I feel like what you folks did. And when I took a quick look at the code, it felt easy to approach. So.
Yeah.
That's nice.
And I think that Nish made a good point early on. When our very first conversation with the team was, we have architecture guidance. Like when you go to the .NET website, this is like specifically like what Nish works on, and much more. Is one of the pieces that he works on is this architecture guidance, like eShop on containers, like and eShop on Dapper and all these other things. So if you want to learn like big architecture, all this other stuff, then you can definitely, go down that path basically there. Now, if you are looking for, reference apps, then we also have those two in those big, really big, architecture diagrams there. But the nice compliment here, for me at least, was that I've been living and breathing in the web, mostly client development space, I would say, and a little bit more on the web. But like Nish has been really focusing in on microservices and backend architecture. So we were a great complement for each other, right? Because this thing is not only like it's multiple services that will walk through the code for the backend, and those are going to be containerized and put into some new fancy services, which is really cool. We'll talk about. But then also we have a .NET MAUI app, we have a Blazor app, we have an ASP.NET Core front end, and we also want to show the integration between the Blazor app and the .NET MAUI app too. So there was a lot of pieces. So actually, when you open it up, there's a few more projects than I would have liked if I could go back in time. But when you're sharing code, you share code via projects, and that's what we ended up doing. So I think it looks really nice. I don't know, thoughts, Nish?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's also the other side of thing is like, as you said, I mean, the projects, that's one thing. The other thing is like getting started. Like, if you pull in a code, even if it's a complex one, if we give an easy way to get started with it, that makes it a lot easier to get started and then eventually get to that progress. I think that's what we did in this podcast app as well, to make sure the guidances are very cleanly written out, so that if someone wants to, for example, if they want to fork this repo into their own and set up the CI/CD pipeline, we've made everything into the GitHub secrets.
Yeah.
So you just add secrets and it's all set up for you. So you don't have to really worry about, I need to find out this configuration. What is this line of code? What is it doing there? What configuration is it pulling from? Am I running in staging? Am I running in prod? All those kind of things has gone away when everything is very configurable here. So I think we put those efforts into make it easier for everyone to get started there too.
Yeah, and the thing that I want to show too, so I'm going to show the application running locally. So if you just want to pull down the source code, get it on your local machine, then Nish is going to show that backend part, because it's funny enough, I wrote the documentation on local development. Nish wrote the documentation on deploying your own backend. So I say we just go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and move a window over here. Do you want to bring up my screen? Perfect. Okay. So this is the GitHub repo. It's Microsoft /.net-podcasts. John will throw it over into the links. This is where you're going to find all of the source code, and you can ask questions on the issues tab. We should probably put a discussions tab on there probably. But there's a bunch of files in here. We'll go through them. But yeah, this is like the end all, like what it is running. So it's .NET 6, it's ASP.NET Core, some Razor pages, Blazor app, a .NET MAUI app. It uses Azure Container Apps. And there is actually a live running version of the website. So you can actually see right over here, it's deployed. So we deploy it right here, which is cool. And then this is the app here. This is the ASP.NET Core Razor pages. So this pulls in some stuff here. You can browse it. The apps are not live on the App Store. Those are just placeholders. We plan on that at some point in the future when .NET MAUI is closer to GA. But you can click the sign in button. It doesn't sign you in, but it signs in locally to your browser. But you have the Blazor app here, a bunch of the podcasts. You can listen to my podcast, Merge Conflict. Awesome. There's a settings page. You can flip it to dark mode. There's a subscription. So if you want to add a subscription, you can see the subscription here. You can add podcasts to listen later. Looks really nice. And then there's all this stuff. And there's even a listen together mode, which is pretty great. So that's cool. So that's right here. You can check it out live. And eventually we own .netpodcast.com. So it'll be there at some point. I'm going to work on that. So this is what it looks like. It looks super beautiful across desktop, web, mobile, all the things. You can see all the podcast statuses. It's all set up in CI/CD. And then there's this architecture. So actually zoomed it out over here. It's a little bit, it's big, but it's not that complicated, I guess, in general. But kind of what we're seeing is that there's a mobile MAUI app, .NET MAUI app right here for iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows. Then also the Blazor app down here too. And there's also a hybrid app that it kind of uses the two together. But pretty much what happens here is the mobile apps speak directly to this Azure container environment and Azure Container Azure Container Apps service. And that's basically running our web API that's going to talk to our Azure storage or to our databases. That's going to have all the podcasts. And then down over here are some other services. So our web application is running in an app service. And then we also have a Signal, our hub, for our listen together mode too, which is kind of cool. And then this all runs in this container registry. So we put all of our images there. That's mostly it. It's ideally, it's a little bit tall, I would say. But besides that, it's not too crazy, right? You have some mobile apps and some web apps. And they're either... they're talking to APIs all in this center cluster, which are then talking to storage or a database. And then there's a listen together mode that has this component here that's actually shared between the mobile apps and the Blazor app over here. I don't know. That's pretty much the architecture, right?
Yeah, that's
for the data. So you've got it in SQL Azure when it's in production. When it's running locally, are you running SQL Server or what database are you using locally?
I'll tell you. I will say, if you're on Facebook, it looks like we have a spam ASP.NET account.
Yeah.
We are not giving away 50 Bitcoin to the community, so please do not click on that address. John will figure out a way to block that.
That's all that's happening.
Can't have fun. So interestingly enough, so we're using Azure SQL here, and of course Azure Table Storage as well, and a feed queue. Locally, we'll get it up and running locally, but we actually have a SQL database locally that we're going to be using inside of Docker, which is very cool. So I will show that here in a second. So let me show you actually how you get started with it, because there's instructions. There's a walkthrough of the repositories. This is what Nish is going to talk through, the full deployment with GitHub Actions. But there's this local deployment quick start. And I love this so much because basically what you do is clone the repo, and then as long as you have Docker Desktop installed, you'll run one command and everything will be up and running. So let me just do that. I'm going to do it from scratch. Okay. It's happening in real time. No jokes. I'm going to copy this, go into Visual Studio, clone a repository. I'm going to call it Standup. So that's where I'm going to put it right here in my Standup directory. I'm going to clone it. Rad. All right. That takes a few seconds. It's not a lot of code, but it's enough. There's some images in there. And we're done. Now there are specifically some other things in here. So there's some different solutions. We'll go through those in a second here. But that's all I need to do is just clone it. And then what I'm going to do is run this Docker command, this Docker compose up. So one thing that I did ahead of time is I ran this ahead of time. So I have all of my images. I don't think you want to sit here and see me download a bunch of images, but they're all here. And I have nothing running in my containers. So there's nothing here. So let me go ahead and come to my terminal, and we'll say cd.net podcasts. I have a lot of them. What did I call it? Standup. Perfect. Plus that. Zoom in. So I'm going to say Docker compose up. Now, I pulled the images, but if you didn't pull the images, it would pull the images for me automatically. And then it's going to deploy everything locally inside of Docker. I don't actually know what's happening. So Nish, what is actually happening?
Yeah. So basically, all our projects have a Docker file in it. So everything what we're doing is all containerized images. So what Docker Compose as a tool, what it's doing is we have the YAML file called Docker Compose, where we say what what images to pull in, and if it's a HTTP endpoint, what port to run on. So we define those configurations. What you see here is the Docker Compose file. So we also pointed to all the Docker files so that it goes and builds based on the Docker file. So if you don't have it locally, if you're first time installing Docker, you might not have anything installed. So it'll take a while because it's going to pull in all the dependent images, and it goes and pulls everything. And you can also see that. Yeah, that's the database. So John, you were asking how we run the SQL Server. So this has been very, very easy. Like, you don't have to install SQL Server. You can run it directly on the Docker and provide the connection string correctly. So yeah, all the services pulled in, and also the Azure Ride, which is the Azure storage thing.
Very
So
cool.
we run them. Yeah.
I think that's something that I have to remind myself. It's easy to forget that SQL Server runs in Docker. And it's like you can, because I've spent so much time in my years as a developer setting up databases locally and why isn't SQL Server communicating and all this stuff. It's amazing for this. It's just like, no, boom, it just does it.
It just works.
And there's this override file. Can you explain what that is, Nish? Because this has a bunch of stuff. Yeah,
so in override files, you basically write in all your configurations that you need to run in, like, for example, the environment variables and things like that. Also, you define the port. So if you have 5080, if you have some ports running already in your machine, so it can conflict, so you can go ahead and change that. Ideally, 5000 series are fine. So you configure those things. And also, if you see those environment variables, those are the configuration that we will that eventually will get injected into your .NET Core app. So you can actually read this thing. So if you look at that podcast API base address, which says http://podcast.api, that podcast.api is nothing but the name of the service that you defined in that other file, right?
Yep. Yep.
So that's the automatic service. Yeah, there you go. So that's your automatic service discovery. So you
cool.
inject this into the configuration. So your .NET app will know that this is how it needs to connect. So because they're running inside the Docker, they can service A and service B can connect based on this URL that we specify there.
Oh, cool.
So
what happens here, and you'll see like this running, basically when you run this, it also starts to run a bunch of stuff. So when you run this command, it's going to spin up all the services, and it will also start to update the database automatically, because we have a bunch of services that update the database and pull images and things like that for all the podcasts. So that happens automatically, which is cool. So if I go back over to Docker, we can see over here that, that we have some things up and running.
So I gotta get used to this GUI. I always use the Docker images command, and not so used to this one.
Yeah. So we can see that we have the storage running, and I'm just going to go ahead and like shut this down too, and see if that stops everything. And then we can kind of start everything back up as well. There's just like a play button. I'm a big GUI fan, so I'm just a big fan of just like starting everything from the GUI as well. So we have a few things in here. So we have a podcast database. We have a stand-up storage. We have a updater worker, an ingestion worker, our API, our listen together hub, and our podcast web app. Now, I'm not sure why that's not starting, but technically it should start. It started on my other machine. I could have some weird conflict, basically.
Is it not started?
Yeah, it won't start for some reason. But that's probably...
Can you open a new terminal and type Docker PS?
Oh my goodness.
Maximize this. Do you see any web thing? Yeah, it did not start, I think.
Yeah, it didn't start. Now, I will say I did just do this on my other machine. This was my development machine, so it could just be something with that. But it doesn't really matter too much. This should start, and you should be able to browse to it. But I'll show like what this will look like for the API, because you can actually open the API, and like this is actually the API running locally on the machine. So that's kind of cool. On everyone else's machine, everything else should start up. So this web should start up. I probably have a conflict of some port, I bet.
Port, maybe, yeah.
Could be. So you can just open it, and you open it in browser, because I did that on my other profile. But what I wanted to show is like, this is the actual API running inside of here. So here is actually like, all the categories. So if I say try it out and I hit execute, sure enough, like here's all the categories coming back to me from the database. These are being read from the database. If I look at shows, I can do try it out, right? So here I can say, give me, 10 back, hit execute. This will give me all the podcasts back. I can grab one of them here, like the ID, and I can go down into the show ID, right, and just like test it out, basically, paste it in there. And then I'm going to get back information on the show and like all the podcasts and things like that, which are really, really cool. So that's like one thing about it. But let me show you what this actually looks like if I pull up the project here. So what I first want to do is, what if I want to actually run this locally, like some of this stuff locally? The only thing you need for developing the backend services, so we'll talk about the backend and the front end, is to kind of come in, and you just need these two things running all the time, which are going to be the podcast database and the podcast storage. Like they're just there. Imagine that they're just remote, just kind of chilling over there. I'm going to open this NET Podcast Services solution here. And this is going to be my backend services. So my web API, which is a minimal API, our listen together mode. We have some ingester feeds over here too. So if I zoom in over here, it's a little pixelated, so I apologize on my resolution. But you can kind of see like there's basically some controllers. We have a program CS file over here. And that's going to have connections basically automatically to my database, to my feed queue. It creates Swagger. It adds my cores automatically. It has my Swagger UI that you just saw. And then it has some endpoints here. So there's some endpoints, also a controller. So we kind of showed the blending of this world back and forth. And then down here, I'll show you in the app settings, development, this is where it's configured basically automatically to speak locally, to the database on this port, and there's a feed queue as well, things like that. Then there's overrides that you can put in if you want to, but these are the app settings here. So all you need to do actually just set that as the startup project. And again, I've turned it off, so nothing is running here. So if I go back into my Swagger and I refresh that, it's not running, so nothing's gonna happen. It's just gonna spin indefinitely. So let's debug that. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a breakpoint right inside of, let's say, categories inside this map get with our minimal API. So let's do that. Boop. And that's gonna now run this locally, right? So here's our podcast API.
Yeah, you need to run the SQL Server.
Oh, did I turn that off?
Yeah, I think it just came down. Oh, that's DB.
It should be there. Add demo. If I ran it on my other machine, then it worked. Ruh-roh. Ensured database async. Uh-oh. Did you change something, Nish?
No, I just edited the README file.
Uh-oh. That's not good. This worked yesterday. I just did an entire video on it on my machine. Let me do one more thing here then.
Can you Yeah, let's stop that and we'll start over again.
Yeah, let me start it again. Maybe the database tore down for some reason.
Yeah.
That could be.
And do one more thing. Go to your command line and type Docker compose down.
Uh-oh. All right, let me get a second here. Just see if it deploys again over here. Oh, this is running. Come on. Come on. That's what happens when I'm on my debug machine, of course. I wonder if I have some old containers. That could be the other thing on this account too. Oh, I think it's is it running now? Let me see. Let me check. I just hit debug. Let me see. Let me try it again. So I think it would throw an exception if it did have an exception. I guess I can do a breakpoint on the map run. Let me restart it here.
While you're doing that, James, question, and maybe Nish has ideas too, but what are your thoughts on organizing the minimal API? Like, you know what I mean? How did you kind of structure the code here?
Well, I mean, for our minimal APIs, we just kind of put everything in here, to be honest with you, mostly. That seemed to work pretty well for us. It depends. Like sometimes I think you can put them in another file. It's really not liking this database for some reason.
Yeah, it's probably got the network issue. Can you do the Docker compose down maybe?
Yeah.
So that it kills all the network.
Yeah.
And now, yeah.
Up again?
No, just hit Docker PS and then do the Docker compose. If you're doing that, just run that one alone. Okay, so now you go back and just start the.
They're gone.
Yeah. Not using the compose. Do you want to use a compose? If you want to use a compose, then you need to specifically say podcast.api.
It should be able to spin it off. Well, it's funny because it obviously was working locally. So I wonder if just something was funky.
To get the logs in here, yeah.
Yeah, because now they're all running here.
Yeah. So now I don't think you can. Yeah, you can stop that and then try debugging.
Yeah, let me try those. Let me turn these off too. Let me try this because obviously the Swagger thing was there. Let me see if this is working.
Now you can also attach to a running process, right? If you start them with Docker Compose,
yeah,
in Visual Studio you can attach, but it's a little more complicated attaching to a Docker process.
The only thing
I'm spoiled. I've been still playing with Thai lately, and that makes it a little easier to attach to
Only thing I can think of that maybe I had on this machine is maybe my images are all messed up. You know what I mean? That could be an issue.
Maybe the database one, maybe delete the DB or something.
This one?
Yeah, just the storage. Yeah, just delete that one.
Let me delete. Like I did have this on my I had it on the other instance on my other account, and it was working flawless, which is of course exactly what I want.
Funny because I spun this up yesterday and like had no problem Docker Compose.
Yeah, it should work.
Now it's going to have to download all my stuff for me automatically, which is like what exactly I wanted to avoid. But hopefully I have a relatively fast internet. So we're going to try it one more time. Because what should happen here is it should pull all of my images automatically for me, and then build everything and do it. Now, what could have happened is I was in my development branch. So I bet that my error was that it was probably like built these images that I didn't refresh was built against an old one. So that could definitely be like the issue that I'm running into. So the fun part is that we do it live and we're there. And it always happens. And we're not on a crazy time crunch, even though we completely are. So, which is cool. But now you get to actually see it in real time. So if you're really interested in what is happening, and luckily I did pay for upgraded internet recently, so it should pull everything. Nice. I pulled this yesterday and it took about 3 or 4 minutes, I think, totally to do on the machine. And like what this should be doing at this point, right, is if we go back into, let's say, and I'm zoomed in very far, but if you go into the, like, let's say source code and then services and podcast, there should be a Docker file here too. So, right, so each service has its own Docker file associated with it over here. So it should be able to like pull all that locally and build that up. So let's go and see what's happening over here. I'll exit that. And yeah, things are happening. And I like this number too. This is what I was staring at yesterday, which was basically like, okay, how long will this take? And this is building everything, right, Nish?
Yeah, it's building everything.
Yeah. My assumption is that I probably had older images from when we were building the demo before we moved it over. That's probably my issue. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I mean, usually with the databases, there could be, if there are some read-write issues that would have happened, it could cut up the database. So deleting the images, deleting the volumes, and restarting Docker should help mostly.
Yeah.
We'll see, but we don't have enough time to debug this, I guess.
Yeah. I'll be interested to see if like this solves it or not, because it usually goes pretty quick here. So we're already on 50, which is nice. And then it should run through it. But it's funny because it actually was the API was speaking directly to it, which is good.
Yeah. So that's why I feel that it could be a corrupted DB or something.
DB, yeah. Yeah. I wonder if we change something in between the two. So that could definitely be it. So, but it's all happening. It's all happening. Everyone likes to watch a Docker thing do its thing, right?
It's exciting. Had a question come in from Jose asking about if we're using AOT for the Blazor front end.
Are we using AOT compilation for Windows?
I didn't see anything specifically in the.
Well, for the .NET MAUI application, iOS uses AOT by default. I'm not sure how Windows applications do the AOT setting yet. There's probably some config file, and Android there's a config file too. On the Blazor application, I'm not positive. We can take a look at that. I'm going to spin up the other app too. Actually, I'll open the Blazor app and see if that is going to work for us here locally too. Well, this thing finalizes this. And the Blazor app, we do have all like the new trimming. I think AOT and all that other stuff is on there too. If I go into the podcast.web solution, that's going to be, and I'll walk through that too. It has basically a bunch of different solution or projects in the solution, but there's a client and a server. You actually want to run the server. Also, that is a startup. But basically, the client is the Blazor app. The podcast server is the ASP.NET Core app. There's really not a lot in there. There's just a single like Razor page and some HTML inside of here. There's nothing really fancy in general, but the pages and components are part of the Blazor application, and they're also shared between the .NET MAUI application as well. So this is still going over here. So it's happening. This is probably the database. Maybe it could be the big one. there's a big extraction happening up here of this.
It's still, like I was saying earlier, it blows my mind that SQL Server is running in a Docker image. Like it just.
We are 70 of 76, so we'll see if that happens. 73, 74. Come on, podcast server running. Yeah, what's cool is like once it's all running, we'll see them all repopulate over here too. And now obviously you can tell who's like the Docker and microservice expert, because Nish just like was like, oh yeah, just like run this command, do this thing. I'm like, if I just run Docker compose up, that's all I know basically. I know how to use the GUI and delete all the images. That's all I know how to do. I'm kind of worthless, but also.
Yeah, I think with the volumes, we have had issues in the past with the SHA-1 containers as well. So the easiest thing to do is to delete the volumes and, restart Docker, and most of the things gets fixed.
Now, what's the difference between images, volumes, and containers and apps?
Okay. Image is nothing but an immutable unit, like whatever once you put a Docker file and you have the instructions to build an image. So that's the image. That's also called as container image.
Yeah.
And you call containers when you run that image. They're called containers. So when you run it in Docker, it's called running inside the Docker containers. You may run it in Kubernetes. So wherever the Docker host or the host that can run these Docker images, it can run there, right? Mm-hmm. So what was the other question? Containers, volumes are nothing but how you how you can expose your host machine's file system to your images, so that if you want to store your databases and other things, you can actually store. Like for example, in the ASP.NET, we also mount the volumes for the HTTPS certificates and things like that, so that it works very well inside the Docker. Yeah.
Got it. All right, let's see. So, everything's created. Everything's running. Okay, because I think before other things failed. Okay.
There you go. It's all one.
Yeah. Okay. So now it's all running. So now if I actually, see these things.
It's going down.
It went down. I don't know why. Well, the web seems to be working, but the server's not. What just happened?
Well, it's weird. We can look at the code and stuff too, right?
Hold on. It seems to be failing over here. I should just join from my other
images are.
Oh, let me restart Docker.
Yeah, images are exiting for some reason.
Yeah.
You can also do one more thing, is you can specifically just host those images that you need and then run the podcast API from Visual Studio.
Yeah, that's the other thing. I wanted to kind of show how it worked a little bit gracefully, but now I'm running out of time. But let's just see if this worked. Well, the podcast API wasn't running. So that's kind of the bummer town that I'm running into over here. But when in doubt, I do have a little bit of a backup. So let's see if this will run really quick. And if not, then we'll continue on and let Nish do his thing. I have to leave in like 10 minutes, but Nish can stay on and actually show you through a deployment. And Nish's demos will be better than mine because they'll actually work. And this is a bummer because I had it working on my other machine. Let's see. Okay, let's go ahead and start these up. And let's see if everything goes. Yeah, my only assumption is that maybe something on my machine is just a little bit funky right now and it's going a little bit odd. So,
okay, hold on. Let's.
Nope, they seem to be exiting, so that's not great. Okay. But the storage and thing are working. Let me see if this thing runs now. Let me just see if this runs at all, the API. This is the podcast app, and let's see if the server is running at all. Because this says that the API is not running, so let's see if that will run for us. This is a bad demo. John, we should have done it tomorrow.
Should have recorded this. Should have all been pre-recorded.
It was a terrible demo. Yeah, something is messed up on my machine.
So that's another thing, is people can actually watch this on the .NET Conf site, right? And
I have a video going out that literally it was a thing. So I want to log off of this machine and go to my other machine. John.
It's funny because I ran this last night and it's like boom, boom, boom. And so I have a question, and this is maybe more of a niche question, but there's Docker Compose, and then also like lately all the hotness is Kubernetes. Everyone talks about Kubernetes and stuff. How do you make a decision with Docker Compose, and how do those compare?
Yeah, so Docker Compose is nothing but a tool that will help you run things locally with the Docker Compose override files and YAML files. Kubernetes is the orchestrator. You know, it's more. I mean, orchestrator. So, for example, like if we talk about always scaling and things like that with containers. So, let's say if you are running it on virtual machines, you probably have like 2-3 virtual machines running, and there could be there are chances that there are underutilized resources in a particular virtual machine, right? So, when it comes to containers, the advantage is it can be moved into a virtual machine where there is space that it can execute, and then shut down the other virtual machine to save cost.
I'm going to go to my other profile. I'll be right back.
All right.
Right. So now if you want to have that kind of an automated experience of scaling up and scaling down and scaling across virtual machines and things like that, you need an orchestrator. And Kubernetes is now, it's become the de facto orchestrator. So everyone uses it. And it's also like cloud agnostic in certain way. Like, you can take the same Kubernetes scripts and things like that and run on different clouds if you want to. And Azure Kubernetes Service is one implementation of Kubernetes, right? So which has its own features that it comes with. So yeah, I think for prod and deployments, it should always be Kubernetes or something similar where you want to run containers. So we did not use directly Kubernetes APIs for this demo. What we did is we used Azure Container Apps, which is like a serverless container platform. So it is running on top of Kubernetes, but it does not give you any access to the Kubernetes APIs. But it is really amazing that you can actually deploy your applications and set the scale sets. So you can even say you want to scale to 0 or scale to 50 based on scaling rules. So that way you can even decide how you want to scale and things like that without really going through any of this Kubernetes APIs and YAML files and things like that, which probably has some sort of a learning curve for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, because like you're saying, a lot of what's nice with Kubernetes is like you're saying, orchestrating and then making sure that things are scaled up and down. But if you don't want to go in and specifically manage all that yourself, you can just allow it to do that. So.
Yeah, exactly. So Kubernetes is, if you have played around with it, I've been working on Kubernetes like from past 2.5, 3 years now. And once you get used to it, it's kind of like, it's nice to play around with those things, but it also has its own complexity. So that's why there are other things like, if you're happy with just running a simple piece of code, you can run it on Azure Functions. If you want to still use the containers and other platforms, you can use Azure Container Instances. There's Azure Web App for containers. So there are so many options out there right now, and if Kubernetes is your choice, then you can go with Kubernetes too.
All right, I'm totally back.
Okay. Oh wait.
And he's gone. We can't see you, James. But
he's silent.
Okay, yeah, his screen is visible though.
There we go.
Added the stream. Okay.
My entire machine's messed up yet because I probably did something. Oh my gosh. Anyways. This whole thing totally works. Now it's all broken. Oh my gosh, this is the worst demo. Can I just do it next week? Why do we do this, John? My assumption is now that I do have it running on multiple things, and now it is running. I don't understand why it's all upset at me. Anyways, this was working literally yesterday in this video, and all you need to do is like hit go. Now my video is not working. Anyways, it's so upset at me. Connection is not secure. Oh my gosh.
So isn't that 5,002? Oh, 5,001 for the API. Is that right?
Yeah, now it's probably running on the other thing. Oh my gosh. Oh, I'm sorry, everyone. Now my video doesn't work. I spelled my name wrong. I am so upset at everything right now. Oh.
I think one thing that just to call out here.
Okay, hold on.
This is the hard work we do.
No, this works. It works. Okay, hold on. Okay, hold on. So, okay, it does work. Okay, here's the thing. Here's the podcast app running in Docker, 5002 localhost. It's totally working. Oh my gosh. Okay. So now we're going to put time codes on this video because I've gone and messed it up. So this is running in Docker, speaking locally in Docker, all the things. Right? Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the API.
Don't do it. Right? No, it's all working.
Nope, it's off. We're going to debug the API locally on our machine.
Okay.
And It's already in use, but it shouldn't be in use because I probably broke something. Let me try it again. Okay. So I think because, oh no, I have the listen together over here. Let me turn off listen together. That's what I had wrong. Oops. Okay. Okay. Turn off. There we go. Aha! Haha! It's running locally. Amazing. Whew.
Nice. And what did you do exactly?
So my Docker over here is working great. My Docker on my other profile not working great. So what's happening here is when I spin up that backend, it has the listen together mode and the podcast API. So when you want to debug just the backend services, you can just spin up the podcast database and the storage here, which are working on this instance. And here now I'm local on localhost 5000. And we can see that when I hit try it out and hit debug, I hit the breakpoint inside of Visual Studio.
Oh, wow.
It's all working amazing. I'm debugging through. Everything is flawless. I love life. Oh my goodness. Now you're like, whoa, let me go ahead now and run the Blazor application. So let me open up that, which is what I was showing earlier. And everyone who's watching in post, we will put a timestamp. So you should fast forward through it. But open podcast.web over here. And look that it's actually looking here in the app deployment to talk to those things. So if I'm developing the web app, I can just go ahead and spin up my API and my listen together hub. And those will just be running. I could run them locally, right? In the other project and do multi-targeting type of stuff. But I'm just going to run those local. Run the podcast server application here, which is running right here. And okay, that port is already in use. For some reason, and that should work. Maybe it's running on my other machine. That probably is definitely it. Let me run it on a different. I bet that's the other thing too. Okay, let me do 6 over here. I bet that I am running it on my other profile, so that port is probably in use. Yeah. So that's definitely what I'm doing. So I'm going to go ahead and change these to 6 and then hit save and hit debug again. You can see like there's a bunch of environment variables being passed in and things like that. So now we get our podcast application running locally on port 7256 that we just changed it. You just saw me change the port. This is the Blazor or the Razor application. Hit sign in. I do all the things. There's all my podcasts. And you can see it's the one running locally different than in the container because some of the images are broken on here, but it's all running locally. I can click on it. I can start developing my application, things like that. Bingo bango. It's awesome. I'm so sorry for all the demo failures, but now that is how it should work. And that's what's happening here. And then really from there, you don't need to really worry too much. So if you want to run the listen together mode podcast API in Docker, it'll automatically talk to it, or you can run it locally all on the same ports. And I better go because I need to go do this. I'm so sorry.
You're producing another thing. Yep.
For it, but we got it working, even though my video doesn't work. And now,
that was wonderful. Gosh. Okay, well, good luck on your next thing, and I'll chat with Nish for a few more minutes on this.
We got it. Yeah, and then I think what we'll also do probably on a .NET MAUI stand-up is probably go through stuff here. But Nish's stuff is way cooler. Thanks, everyone, for putting up for my 30 minutes of getting Docker stuff. But you now see it in real time. All right, thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thanks, Moose. Take care. That was nice.
Right. Should I?
You made it work. You made it work. I was, it's probably the environmental issue because as he was doing it, I ran my Docker Compose up right here. So it's all working and I have these thing running locally. So I tested it. I was not doing it locally because I was setting up the GitHub Actions and things like that for this demo. So yeah, it does work. So it's just an environmental issue on James's machine.
Now,
all right.
When you're doing Docker development, like a lot of it, you have service discovery set up. So you can have it like, you don't necessarily have to have it hard coded to ports and stuff, right? You can say like, just, I guess some of that is because of trying to like attach and debug into it. You do need specific endpoints.
You mean in the override files, so that the port files that we? Yeah, that's just because if we want to expose these things to a host machine, like if you want to access that from a host machine, that's why we are specifying this port. Otherwise, you can just set it as 80 for your HTTP and 443 for HTTPS, and it should be good.
Cool.
For the internal communication, you don't have to expose the port outside. And for when you deploy it to, let's say, Kubernetes and things like that, that's where it gets a little more complicated in terms of like, you probably tell what service type it is, like either a node port, load balancer, which will give you an automatic public IP, or you may configure an ingress point. It's another a Kubernetes kind that you add, and then you specify the port and things like that there.
Okay.
But we'll not go into those things. But what I wanted to show, how much time do we have, John?
I mean, depends if we want to jump immediately. So I've got this other meeting in 7 minutes.
Okay.
7-ish minutes.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to show this quick demo on how container apps really works, but I think you guys can go check it out in the .NET Conf demo, which shows how to do how the Azure container apps kind of like scales up and scales down depending on the scaling rules. But for now, I'll show you how to set this up in your own fork. So for example, this one you see, what James showed was the .NET podcast.azurewebsites.net, which comes from the actual repository where the GitHub Actions is set. But this one is my fork. So all that I did is I went to this Microsoft/.NET-podcast and then fork this repo, right? So once I fork this repo, all that I need to do is set up a few GitHub secrets to get it running in my CI/CD pipeline. So, which is what I wanted to show you today. And we have, I'm sure we don't have enough time to get through all of these things, so it's all documented here. So if you click on this, follow the detailed guidelines, it will talk about how to set everything up for you. Okay, and you don't have to do anything other than just setting up the resource group and configuring the service principal from the Azure side of things. But rest all things, you will be configuring it in GitHub Actions, and everything will be taken care for you to get deployed into your Azure resource group. So yeah, there are multiple ways you can create resource groups, but the easiest way is you go to the Azure Cloud Shell and make sure you have some good enough rights to create resources, and go ahead and create this resource, and then create this service principal, which is what you need to configure your GitHub Actions. So when you execute this thing, so remember to add your subscription ID here, replace that, and replace the resource group, which you just created here in the first step. And then go to your GitHub repository settings and add the secrets called Azure-credentials. So if you look at my repo here, if I go to the settings, go to the environments, let's go to the secrets. And this is where I'm configuring. So this Azure credential, you create a new one and then just go and paste that thing out here. That's all you need to do. Right, so you can create a new repo secret, put in that variable correctly, and then put in that value there, right? So once you do that, if we go back here.
Those repository secrets, those are restricted only to your rights or to
yeah.
Okay, that's very cool.
Yeah, so this is everything I'm doing here is on my repo and my fork, so it is not going to affect anything from the original upstream ones. And even when there's things that we constantly change in that .NET podcast, you can actually bring in those changes to your fork, and your CI/CD pipeline will kick in, and it will deploy to your own resource group. So that's the simplification that we have done here. Is everything we have put it into this environment secrets, and all that you need to do is make sure you provide the right namings. There are a few things that are very unique. For example, ACR name that you provide, it creates a public endpoint. So make sure that is unique. Otherwise, your deployments will fail. So that's why I've given this your name podcast ACR, put some random name that is unique, and then add something that is that makes sense to name it as an ACR name. And there are a few things like that, like storage name, and then there is a web app name. And SignalR web app name. So these four things needs to be unique. Other than that, you can actually put in the same values that you see here. And and of course, the user login and password, make sure you give a strong password for SQL to accept it. And so when you set up all these things, you basically have set up the GitHub Actions to be you can set up GitHub Actions, and it'll pick up all these values from your secrets and deploy everything to your Azure, right? So
from a developer workflow point of view, like you start by developing this locally and using like Azurite and the different like emulators and things. And then I'm guessing with that, you're just using like user secrets or environment variables and things. And then your workflow then would be to Dockerize and move these into Docker, your Docker overrides, and then eventually into your GitHub secrets. Is that kind of the workflow?
Yeah, so that's the inner loop for when you do with Docker Compose and things like that. That's your inner loop where you're setting the environment variables that you will configure through these Docker Compose file environment variables, which will finally inject into your .NET app into the configurations, and then it will know where to connect to, right? For example, simple example is a connection string, right? So connection string, you probably have something like podcast DB connection string. So when you do the Docker Compose, you're actually saying that's your local host, whatever is the port that is running on. So it'll connect to that with the username and password that you configure there, basically that connection string that you provide entirely there, right? So now, when it comes to here, what we're doing is we don't know the connection string yet because we need to create the podcast DB server, and then that needs to be deployed, and then we need to create the connection string, right? So what we do here is these are the configurations that we'll use to create the podcast DB first, and then we will make that connection string into the variables, and then we'll inject into it. So that way, we get the exact connection string, and you have the username and password here. So when you connect it to it with this username and password, you will be getting through that, and also it is connecting through within the Azure VNet. So it is kind of like it has those restrictions. So if you want to connect to this SQL server from your machine, you need to kind of like whitelist that IP and then connect to those SQL servers, right? Okay. So I'm just giving you one example of how this whole thing works.
Okay.
Right. And the other thing is like when you're building locally, you will always use the Docker Compose build and you build that image. But here we are using the ACR name. So we're going to build it inside the Azure Container Registry itself, right? So we will send this code, use a Docker file to build it. And then you'll see unique, we use the GitHub SHA for keeping the tag for the images. And that's how we are pulling this into our deployment, which is into the container apps. So that's these ones, like Kubernetes and env name is what you configure as the environment name for your container apps. And then the workspace name is nothing but the logs. So there are a few things that we use here. So that's why all that you need to do is just make sure that those things are sent in as your values. So the interesting thing here is, as you were asking about the deployments, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look at the deploy, under deploy, if you go to service, and there's this ACR deployment.json. So everything is into this ARM template. So it's going to take in those values, what you created in the GitHub secrets, and then use that to deploy. For example, if you want to deploy SQL Server, it's going to deploy SQL. There will be instructions on how to create SQL servers into this, not the ACR one, the API deployment. Yeah, this one will have that, right? And for example, container apps, right? So we have this, we have steps here, how to deploy container apps. And it is, for example, it is taking this, you can see this the podcast DB, that name that it's taking as a secret. And you can see this variable that's actually pulling in from the podcast DB connection string, which was created based on those environment variables and output from the previous steps that were executed on Azure, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
It's pretty neat. I mean, it's a one-time setup. So whatever is there on this README, it's just a one-time setup, because once you set it up correctly, then your pipelines are all set. And after that, you can just go ahead and run. An important step here is to make sure run it sequentially. So make sure you run the podcast API CD first, and then go ahead and run the podcast hub, which is a SignalR hub, and then there is the web that you need to deploy, because the podcast API is the one which has the scripts for just deploying to SQL Server and ACR setup and things like that. So you need to set up that first. And if you run each of it one by one, it'll all be set up for you automatically. And then all that you need is whatever the web app name you gave, it will configure correctly, and then it'll give you this endpoint that you can work with.
Okay, awesome. So we just were rated by Layla, and which is awesome. But we are actually we're wrapping up our thing here. So we've been looking at the .NET Podcast app, which was from .NET Conf, and I've got the link for the GitHub repo, and we've walked through the deployment stuff. And then kind of as we're closing, Nish, where other than kind of digging through the repo and looking at the docs there, is there anything else you'd like to recommend for people getting started with this?
No, I think we would like to hear the feedback on this thing, like, because we made it extremely simple to get started, and deploying it onto Azure, you would come with, generally if you look at it, it'll be like 50 different steps to do things. So because we have this kind of like nice CI/CD setup, we thought like, okay, it would be awesome if when someone forks it, we give them the same instruction on how to configure it, and then it's set up for them. So give that a try, and then help us improve this if you feel that. I'm pretty sure this could be a lot more improved, but only thing that we are not accepting is complexity.
Yeah, that makes sense. I will say too, like from James running through this is something, and I'm sure Nish, you've had this too. When you're running demo stuff, you're constantly installing, uninstalling multiple versions and all this stuff locally. When I grabbed this last night and ran it, Docker Compose out, it just all ran. It was like super smooth. So like if things seemed complex and complicated earlier, it's like you're saying, because James has multiple versions of this and ports locked and all this stuff going on. So.
Yeah, that can happen. Like if you're working with multiple like images and multiple ports and things like that, you don't know where the configurations you're modified and things like that. But those are rare instances. I was surprised that he was going through that thing, because as he was saying that, he did the entire video just yesterday. So I as he was doing it, I ran it locally, and I did not have those images, so it took some time. But it just works. It's just straight out of the box. And that's a big benefit with Docker as well, right? So if you install Docker correctly, configure it correctly in your local machine, then just pull in the code and it just works.
Cool. One thing, just as we're wrapping up too, is we have not had you on before, but you help run a lot of the guidance. And I wondered if you want to like take the opportunity and just point people at some of the guidance stuff that you've been doing lately.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go to .net/architecture, you'll see a bunch of free ebooks and resources. So these guidances are like, we work with customers, getting their feedbacks and understand how they are deploying applications to the productions, like specifically the microservices, cloud native worlds, and things like that. And then we kind of like understand how .NET is being used in production, and especially now we are focused more on the microservice and the cloud native world, because that's the lot of demand for us to kind of like, okay, what design patterns to use, and how do you do specific things, like how do you do domain-driven design, or what pattern to use, and things like that. So we have some great guidances here. So if you are working with microservices, there are some PDFs. So we updated this PDF to .NET 6 recently. So give that a try. There are other books that is being updated to .NET 6 slowly. So we have the detailed guidance of how to do Dockers and Kubernetes and the questions that you all ask between Kubernetes and, for example, the question, what cloud native apps to use in Azure, like, how do I choose between a SQL database versus a NoSQL databases? So we have those kind of guidances written here. And the best thing about these guidances is they come with a real world kind of a sample. So you can go ahead and explore this sample. This is what James and we keep talking about. This is kind of like complex sample in terms of because it goes through a lot of patterns and design patterns and things like that. So the complexity exists, but then again, we made it really simple to get started. For example, there are like a bunch of microservices here. Again, first thing about microservices is like, you do loosely coupling, and you make sure that, the repositories for each of it is different. Like every service will have its own repo, but we did not want to do that, because to make it easier for people to get started. So we have it in a mono repo, but at the same time, the CI/CD pipelines are different for these. So you can see these are separate CI/CD pipelines. So just like how you did .NET Podcast, you can also run this locally. You can just bring in Docker Compose, bring in all the images down, and then run it, and then it just runs on this. So it has the entire e-commerce kind of e-commerce application running locally, and you can also deploy this to AKS. And we also have a learn module that kind of like goes into step by step on how to do this as well. Like, so John, this is what I think my day job is to kind of like fight between the simplicity and the complexity. Like, for example, these are complex samples, but at the same time, these are concepts that are people want to understand. How do I do this in production? How do I do this in a large enterprise architecture, right? So what we did is, because we kept getting feedbacks on how complex this is, at the same time, they're just demos, like, they are not real things. So we went and built this MS Learn module. So if you go to aka.ms ASP.NET-microservices, you will see an entire learn path on how do you get started with, how do you get started with your first microservice.NET, which is nothing but the Docker tooling explanation. And then if you go into this, this will explain you how to deploy your .NET application to Kubernetes, and it just uses the regular Kubernetes YAML, the very simple one. These two ones are really simple to execute locally. But from there on, these are like intermediate courses, like, how do you build an enterprise application? So if you are if you are a developer coming into the microservices world for the first time, I'm pretty sure your job will not be to build entire microservices. Your job will to build one microservice and attach to the existing cluster or existing deployment. So this particular module actually goes through all of that. For example, if you go to setup environment, you just need an Azure CLI and Azure subscription. It automatically sets up everything onto your Azure subscription, just like how the scripts that we showed with the GitHub Actions. This has inbuilt scripts in it, which will deploy the entire AKS with all the eShop, all the microservices. And then your job here is to basically build a coupon microservice and deploy to the AKS. So there are a few steps that you will learn, like, how do you implement health check in .NET, because that's one of the features of the cloud native world, to make sure your app reports your health status. And then you Dockerize it, deploy it using Helm charts. And so there are some explanations, really nice explanations onto this. And what we try to do here is, again, as I mentioned, these are complex topics, but at the same time, we try to make it easier and help you focus on what you're learning. For example, if you're learning resiliency, then there are different ways you can implement resiliency. One is you can use Poly with retry logics and circuit breakers, or you can completely ignore code-based resiliency and go with infrastructure-based resiliency. One of it is using a service mesh. So we even show you how to do that with Linkerd service mesh here.
Cool.
And a few things like instrumenting code. And I think one of the things that people ask always is, like, how do I implement features, right? Like, say you're deploying it to the production, but you want to enable the feature for a specific set of people, or a specific set of region. So how do you do that? And so we implement that using Azure Feature Flags. So they're like really hands-on demo on how to do it. And you will not be working with a file new kind of project. You will be working just like how a developer works in a microservices world, like implementing that feature flag in your microservice and deploying it alongside the other microservices. And so microservices does not have a requirement of Kubernetes and things like that, but because of the cloud native world, and it just makes things easier and faster. So we use Kubernetes in this case for all the deployments and things like that. Yep.
Very cool. Well, I'm glad we're able to share this out. And this is something where I think we always talk about the beginner experience, and we really focus on that, when we're talking, because a lot of the developers we're speaking to are newer developers. But it is good for people to know we do have this more advanced guidance, and it takes a ton of work. I know you like, I see all the updates from you as you and team are working on this, because updating advanced guidance is really hard. You've got a lot of code to update. You've got a lot of guidance and things that change over time. And and then as you're working too with, I think you were saying too, you get input from enterprise and customers in the real world as they're building things and what actually works for them.
Right, and the reference sample that eShop on containers that I showed, it's one of the most popular samples out there. Like, I know when CISA was working, there were customers who actually took that entire architectural guidance, and they did it in a real world. And he told me about a couple of customers. So it's kind of like really nice. And what we do is we also kind of like evolve it. Like we try with different new stuffs when it comes out, like container apps or anything new out there with Cloud Native World. So we always are doing the POCs there. So yeah, feel free if you are excited about this world, come and join us on that repo, which is github.com/.net-architecture, which you will get it from the AKMS link. I think .net/architecture link from there.
Okay. All right. Well, I will update the links on this, the community links that'll be in the YouTube description. We should wrap up now. I'm 15 minutes late for the other meeting I was supposed to go to, but I'm so glad we finally were able to get you on the show, and we'll definitely need to get you back on again.
Same here, John. All right, let's get out from here now. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.